They say Hollywood could make anything disappear, for the right price. In the Golden Age, studios didn't just control a star's image. They owned their secrets too. How far would they go to protect their profits? Behind closed doors, careers were saved and scandals erased with bribes, threats, and silent nods. What really happened when fame collided with forbidden pregnancies? And who paid the price for Hollywood's spotless illusion? Sometimes, the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. Not every secret stays buried forever. Judy Garland. Behind Judy Garland's luminous smile and innocent charm was a world of control and exploitation that MGM worked furiously to keep from the public eye. Garland's story is one of Hollywood's most tragic cautionary tales, and it began long before she became a household name. Still in her teens, Judy found herself pregnant at a time when a star's virtue was her most valuable asset, and her studio contract was her golden handcuffs. Louis B. Mayer, the iron-willed head of MGM, saw Judy's predicament not as a crisis for a young woman, but as a potential PR disaster for his studio. The solution was swift and cold-blooded. Garland was ushered into the care of a studio doctor who quietly arranged for her abortion. There was no choice, only the threat of career destruction if she did not comply. Biographers like Gerald Clark and countless Hollywood historians have since confirmed that Garland's experience was not unique, but she may have suffered more than most. Bribes were paid, signatures forged, and nurses threatened to ensure nothing leaked. MGM's publicists manufactured alibis, while Judy herself was coached to smile for the cameras mere days after her ordeal. Garland later spoke in veiled terms about being robbed of any control over her own body, but in her era, silence was bought as easily as a new costume. Her girl-next-door image was preserved at the cost of her innocence, setting a cruel precedent for generations of actresses who came after. Behind the cheerful Technicolor, Garland's story remains a shadowy testament to the lengths Hollywood would go to preserve its illusions, at any price. Jean Harlo. Jean Harlo's career sparkled with glamour, but her private life was a tangle of heartbreak and manipulation, all ruthlessly managed by MGM's fixers. By the mid-1930s, Harlo was Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, but off-camera, she found herself tangled in a romance with William Powell, one that led to a secret pregnancy. For MGM, nothing threatened box office returns like the prospect of their star being an unwed mother. According to David Stenn's biography Bombshell, the studio sprang into action with a familiar playbook: discreet arrangements, a hefty envelope of cash, and strict orders for absolute silence. Harlo's abortion was orchestrated by MGM's go-to physician, a man well acquainted with the studio's unofficial code of secrecy. Nurses and clerical staff were offered generous bonuses to forget what they saw, while Powell, torn between his affection for Harlo and fear for her career, acquiesced to the cover-up. MGM's publicity machine concocted innocent-sounding stories about Harlo's illness, buying her just enough time to recover before cameras rolled again. The emotional toll was devastating. Friends later recounted how Harlo's radiant energy dimmed in the aftermath. She never spoke publicly about her experience, bound by both non-disclosure and the unspoken threat that her career would vanish if she did. The world saw only the sparkling icon, not the young woman forced to pay the ultimate price for studio profits and manufactured innocence. Harlo's story, once whispered in Hollywood corridors, is now a chilling reminder of how the system protected its own, no matter the human cost. Lana Turner. Lana Turner, the original Sweater Girl, was as famous for her scandalous headlines as for her screen performances. Yet some secrets were never meant to reach the public. In her teenage years, Turner's life was managed like a film set. Every move, every emotion, scripted by MGM's handlers. When she became pregnant as a teenager, the studio didn't hesitate. According to her mother, and supported by Turner's own guarded admissions in Lana, the memories, the myths, the movies, the order came down from the top. The pregnancy had to disappear, quietly and completely. A trusted studio doctor was summoned, and the procedure was paid for in cash. No records, no questions. Nurses were bribed to maintain silence, while Turner herself was warned that her entire future rested on her ability to keep the story buried. Studio publicists fabricated an illness and sent Lana away for rest, while the real drama unfolded behind closed doors. The emotional scars remained long after the physical ones healed. In rare moments, Turner alluded to the pain of that decision, but Hollywood's iron grip on her life left her with little room for truth. For MGM, the cover-up was a routine expense. For Lana, it was a lifelong wound. The carefully curated image that made her a star came at the cost of autonomy, a fact the studio was always willing to hide behind bribes, threats, and lies. In Turner's story, the machinery of old Hollywood's deception is laid bare, relentless, merciless, and profoundly personal. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge's beauty and talent broke barriers, but even as she made history, the brutal realities of race, gender, and reputation haunted her every step in Hollywood. Dandridge's relationship with director Otto Preminger was the talk of gossip columns, but beneath the headlines was a deeper, far more private struggle. As biographer Donald Bogle reveals, when Dorothy became pregnant by Preminger, the pressure to terminate the pregnancy was overwhelming. Hollywood had no interest in a scandal involving its first black leading lady, especially one that challenged both social and industry taboos. Studio fixers and trusted friends arranged everything. Dandridge, isolated and fearful, was guided through the process by intermediaries who made it clear the abortion was for her own good, while in reality, it was to protect everyone but her. Money exchanged hands to keep the affair out of the news and to ensure that hospital staff and doctors would not speak. The emotional fallout was profound, yet Dandridge had little choice. Her silence was secured through financial incentives, threats, and a culture of complicity that left her with nowhere to turn. Her career survived, but her pain remained just below the surface, hidden in plain sight. For Dandridge, as for so many women of her era, the bribes and lies weren't only a tool for Hollywood, they were the only way to survive its relentless machine. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford embodied the American dream of reinvention, but her transformation from shopgirl to superstar came at a staggering personal cost. Crawford's relentless ambition was matched only by MGM's desire to maintain her single-girl mystique. According to various Hollywood biographies and studio insiders, Crawford found herself pregnant early in her career, a potential disaster for both her image and the studio's bottom line. The solution was orchestrated in secrecy. The studio dispatched its own physician to handle the situation, ensuring the procedure was performed with utmost discretion. Bribes flowed freely. Hospital staff received envelopes of cash, and those closest to Crawford were sworn to secrecy through a combination of loyalty and fear. Studio lawyers handled any loose ends, making certain no press or rumors could jeopardize Crawford's ascent. Crawford herself rarely spoke about the ordeal, but the trauma lingered in her obsessive need for control and perfection, both on and off screen. In the end, MGM's carefully managed illusion came at the cost of Crawford's autonomy and emotional well-being, a bargain struck not with her consent, but with bribes and lies that Hollywood considered business as usual. Crawford's story underscores how the studio system prioritized image over humanity, ensuring that its stars were whatever the public and the profits demanded. Bette Davis. Bette Davis's fierce independence and legendary talent made her an icon, but behind her bold persona lay the scars of a system that demanded absolute secrecy and compliance. In the early 1930s, Davis became romantically involved with aviation tycoon Howard Hughes. When she found herself pregnant, her dreams and her future hung in the balance. According to biographer Barbara Leeming, the prospect of scandal was intolerable to the studio. A discreet abortion was arranged, orchestrated by the studio's trusted physicians, and paid for with a combination of cash bribes and carefully maintained deniability. Everyone involved in the procedure, from nurses to hospital clerks, received bonuses for their silence. The entire episode was kept off the record, leaving Davis with no official support, only a chilling reminder of Hollywood's priorities. Her public image as a determined, untouchable actress was carefully preserved, but in private, Davis struggled with the reality of what she'd been forced to surrender. The studio's intervention didn't just protect profits, it served as a warning to other actresses that the machinery of silence was always ready to be deployed, no matter who it crushed. For Bette Davis, as for so many others, ambition in Hollywood came with invisible wounds, covered not by kindness, but by cold cash and the unbreakable code of studio silence. Ingrid Bergman. To the public, Ingrid Bergman was the very picture of purity and sophistication, an international star whose performances in Casablanca and Gaslight made her one of Hollywood's most sought-after leading ladies. But beneath the luminous image was a studio system determined to keep every facet of her personal life tightly controlled. Long before the scandal of her affair with Roberto Rossellini erupted in the headlines, Bergman reportedly faced an unplanned pregnancy during her years under contract in Hollywood. For the executives overseeing her career, the thought of their star embroiled in any whiff of controversy was unacceptable. Biographical sources suggest that, rather than risk their box office investment, the studio arranged for a secret abortion, an operation handled quietly, with trusted doctors, and shielded by an elaborate system of bribes. Hospital staff were paid to look the other way. Records were altered or destroyed, and Bergman herself was quietly sent away under the pretense of illness or travel. The experience was never acknowledged publicly, and even in her later years, Bergman spoke only in hints about the personal sacrifices demanded of her. The hush money worked. Not a whisper of scandal reached the press until much later in her career, when the Rossellini affair brought a different kind of infamy. Yet this earlier cover-up stands as proof of how Hollywood's protectors worked overtime, using cash and threats to silence anything that might crack the illusion of perfection. Loretta Young. Loretta Young's career is often remembered for her elegance and her ability to command attention without scandal. But behind that image was one of the most elaborate cover-ups in Hollywood history, centered on her secret pregnancy with Clark Gable. When Young became pregnant, after an affair with Gable during the filming of Call of the Wild, in 1935, abortion was one of several solutions offered by the studio system and her handlers. While Young ultimately decided to have the child in secret, arranging an extended vacation, and later adopting her own daughter as if she had been orphaned, numerous biographies recount that she was heavily pressured to terminate the pregnancy. The pressure came not only from studio executives eager to protect Gable's reputation and Young's career, but also from agents and fixers accustomed to resolving such scandals with a quiet payment and a discreet visit to a doctor. In Young's case, she resisted the push for abortion, but the machinery of lies and bribes still sprang into action. Nurses and hospital staff were paid off. The press was misled, and an elaborate ruse kept the child's true parentage hidden for decades. Young's story is exceptional, not just for her resistance, but for how close she came to being forced down a path so many others were made to follow, all for the sake of a studio's bottom line. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was the epitome of Hollywood glamour, witty, passionate, and endlessly rebellious. But even Gardner, with all her star power, was not immune to the suffocating control of the studio system. Her memoirs, and Peter Evans' Ava Gardner, The Secret Conversations, detail the pressure she faced after becoming pregnant during her high-profile relationships with both Mickey Rooney and Frank Sinatra. In an era when the notion of a pregnant, unmarried star was seen as financial poison, the studio's response was swift and merciless. Studio fixers, whose job it was to protect investments, not individuals, arranged for Gardner's abortions with cold efficiency. Trusted doctors were paid in cash. Nurses and staff were threatened with dismissal or rewarded for their silence. And publicists concocted tales of illness or foreign travel to explain her brief absences. Gardner's own reflections are tinged with regret and anger. She described the procedures as traumatic and deeply isolating, exacerbated by the knowledge that her body and fate were dictated by profit-driven men in expensive offices. The elaborate cover-ups shielded the studios, but left Gardner with wounds no amount of stardom could heal. Her experience is emblematic of a system where bribes and lies were not just tools of convenience, but weapons used to maintain the facade of Hollywood glamour at any cost. Rita Hworth. Rita Hworth, immortalized as one of Hollywood's great femme fatales, found her personal life under the iron grip of Columbia Pictures and its domineering boss, Harry Cohn. Early in her career, Hworth's every move was policed. Her romances, her social outings, even her physical appearance, were crafted to fit the studio's desired image. When an unplanned pregnancy threatened to disrupt her meteoric rise, Cohn and his team responded the way Hollywood always did, with swift action and absolute secrecy. Biographers and Hollywood insiders have long whispered about the lengths Cohn would go to in order to protect his star. It's believed that Hworth was pushed into having an abortion, orchestrated by the studio. The procedure itself was arranged through trusted doctors, who were paid handsomely for both their discretion and their silence. Hospital staff received generous tips, and Columbia's press agents were quick to invent an illness or European vacation to explain any absence from the set. Hworth was not given room to protest. The message was clear. The studio's needs came first, and any problem would be handled behind closed doors. Though Hworth rarely spoke of the ordeal, the toll was evident in her later reflections on Hollywood's ruthless control. The cost of fame was paid in bribes, lies, and a silence that followed her for life. Mary Astor. Mary Astor's life reads like a classic Hollywood melodrama, famous for her acting talent, and infamous for a scandal involving her private diary, which nearly destroyed her career. Yet, even before her most public controversy, Astor was caught in a private crisis that threatened to ruin her carefully built reputation. During a vulnerable period marked by affairs and personal upheaval, Astor became pregnant, an event that was seen by studio executives and handlers as a threat to both her career and their financial investments. According to Edward Sorrell's Mary Astor's Purple Diary, it was the studio's fixers who stepped in, arranging a discreet abortion carried out by a doctor who specialized in such secretive work. The hospital's cooperation was secured with hush money, and everyone involved was made to understand that their silence was not optional. Any hint of scandal was managed with the ruthless efficiency that defined the era. Checks were cut, threats were made, and Astor herself was left to cope with the aftermath in isolation. Her diary would later become famous for other secrets. But this particular trauma was kept hidden by a network of bribes and intimidation. It's a chapter that underscores the quiet tragedies forced upon women in classic Hollywood, where personal choice was routinely erased for the sake of profit and public image. Marilyn Monroe. Few names are more synonymous with both the glamour and the tragedy of Hollywood than Marilyn Monroe. Beneath her legendary beauty and public magnetism lay a life marked by manipulation, exploitation, and desperate attempts to maintain a facade built by men with all the power. According to Donald Spado's definitive biography and other reputable sources, Monroe underwent multiple abortions during her years as a star, each one arranged by the studios, which saw her image as a fragile asset that needed constant protection. The operations were coordinated by studio doctors, paid to keep no records, with additional bribes funneled to nurses and hospital staff to guarantee their silence. Publicists prepared false stories about illnesses or rest cures, keeping the press distracted while Monroe endured the physical and emotional fallout in private. The studio's legal and PR teams worked overtime to erase any trace that could link Monroe's name to scandal, sometimes even paying off the press itself. For Monroe, the trauma of being denied agency over her own body compounded her well-documented struggles with mental health. Yet the system's machinery never faltered. Lies, intimidation, and payoffs ensured that Marilyn remained the world's fantasy, at the expense of her own reality. Her story is a stark example of how Hollywood's brightest stars were left powerless behind closed doors, their personal suffering buried under mountains of money and deceit. Susan Hayward. Susan Hayward's rise from Brooklyn model to Oscar-winning actress was defined by grit, ambition, and an unwavering commitment to her career. Yet behind her image, as a strong-willed survivor, lay secrets that the Hollywood system demanded she keep. Early in Hollywood, Hayward's involvement with married producers and actors created a web of personal complications that the studios were eager to erase. When Hayward found herself pregnant at a critical juncture in her career, the studio's solution was as heartless as it was routine. Arrange for an abortion, keep it off the books, and ensure that no one talked. Biographers allege that Hayward was given little say in the matter. Studio bosses made the arrangements with their usual network of trusted doctors and fixers, ensuring both the procedure's success and the ironclad secrecy surrounding it. Nurses and clerical staff were paid to forget what they'd seen, and any hint of scandal was buried beneath stacks of cash and legal threats. Hayward's absence from the set was explained away with vague stories of illness or family troubles, and she returned to work as if nothing had happened. The pain and emotional consequences remained hers alone to bear, locked away behind her tough exterior. For Hayward, the costs of stardom went far beyond public scrutiny or professional risk. They included the loss of personal autonomy, bought and paid for by a system that valued profit and image over truth and humanity. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's brief but explosive Hollywood career was one of public controversy, private heartbreak, and a relentless spiral into infamy. Her tumultuous relationships and scandalous headlines made her a tabloid staple, but what the public never saw was the way the industry's powerful fixers worked behind the scenes to cover up its darkest secrets. According to John O'Dowd's biography, Payton found herself pregnant during a period when she was already at odds with studio bosses and locked in a destructive affair. Rather than risk further scandal, studio representatives quickly stepped in, arranging for an abortion with their trusted medical contacts. Payton was given hush money and strict orders to keep quiet, orders she had little power to resist, as her career and reputation hung by a thread. Doctors and nurses were paid off, and Payton's absence was disguised as a medical emergency unrelated to her actual condition. The pain of the experience lingered long after the procedure, compounded by the isolation and shame that accompanied Hollywood's hush-hush tactics. For Payton, already living on the edge of the industry's tolerance, the episode was yet another way her life was controlled and commodified. Her story is a stark reminder that even the most notorious scandals often hide deeper wounds, concealed by money, lies, and the iron will of an industry desperate to protect itself. Jane Russell. Jane Russell was promoted as Hollywood's ultimate bombshell, her curves and sultry image central to every film she starred in. Yet the persona that made her a star was carefully engineered, and the reality behind the glamour was much more complicated. Studio bosses saw Russell's off-screen relationships as a threat to her marketability, especially if they resulted in pregnancy. According to both studio records and Russell's own interviews, at least one unplanned pregnancy was handled not with sympathy, but with an offer she couldn't refuse. A secret abortion, arranged and paid for by the studio, with cash and legal threats ensuring no one breathed a word. Russell's decision was shaped by immense pressure, not just from the men who controlled her contracts, but from a culture that viewed a star's personal life as studio property. The procedure itself was conducted by a trusted doctor, with hospital staff paid extra to keep quiet. Russell was warned that her career would be over if she broke the silence. The emotional impact was lasting, though rarely discussed. In public, she remained the confident icon. In private, she carried the burden of a choice that had never really been hers. Russell's experience was far from unique. It was a symptom of an industry built on illusions, where secrets were kept with cash and coercion, and real lives were changed forever by the lies that propped up the dream. Tula Bankhead. Tula Bankhead was famous for her wit, wildness, and refusal to fit into Hollywood's narrow mold. Her off-screen escapades became the stuff of legend, but few understood the price she paid to maintain a public image that balanced on the edge of scandal. In the early days of her career, when pregnancy would have spelled professional ruin, Bankhead underwent multiple abortions, a fact known only to those inside Hollywood's tightest inner circles. Studio bosses, eager to keep her both marketable and out of trouble, ensured these events remained deeply hidden. Insiders recounted how doctors received large sums for their silence and were handpicked not just for their skills, but for their discretion. Any staff who came in contact with Bankhead during these times were given generous tips and stern warnings. Gossip columnists who got too close to the truth were threatened with lawsuits, and occasionally a bribe. Bankhead's willingness to live out loud was always at war with a system determined to keep its secrets buried. The result was a public persona built on bravado and humor, but haunted by episodes she could never discuss openly. Her story is a vivid reminder that Hollywood's code of silence didn't just suppress scandal, it erased the real lives and struggles of women who dared to challenge the rules. Myrna Loy. Known as the perfect wife in dozens of films, Myrna Loy represented stability and decency on screen, but her off-screen experiences were subject to the same pressures and controls as her contemporaries. Studio records and details from her memoirs hint at least one abortion, arranged at a time when her career and reputation were at their most fragile. Loy's predicament was handled with clinical precision by MGM's legal team and private fixers, whose primary goal was to ensure that not a single rumor leaked to the press. Doctors involved were handsomely rewarded and told in no uncertain terms that their compliance was non-negotiable. Loy was quietly given time away from set under the guise of illness or family business, and her privacy was protected not by compassion, but by a web of contracts, NDAs, and bribes. Loy's dignity and sense of self were casualties in a battle she never chose to fight. Though she hinted at the emotional toll in her later writings, the truth was always tucked beneath the surface, a casualty of an industry that demanded perfection and was willing to buy it at any cost. Loy's story is emblematic of how easily Hollywood's machinery could erase personal pain for the sake of public fantasy. Clara Bo. As the original It Girl, Clara Bo's magnetic energy and beauty made her an icon of the Roaring Twenties, but the scrutiny she endured was unmatched. Her personal life was a constant target for gossip, scandal, and blackmail, leaving her especially vulnerable to the manipulations of Paramount's powerful handlers. According to David Sten's Runnin' Wild, Bo underwent at least one abortion, orchestrated by the studio after a high-profile affair. With Bo already suffering from anxiety and media harassment, the event became just another secret forced into the shadows. Paramount's fixers took no chances. Medical staff were bribed and records destroyed, while journalists who pursued the story were bought off or threatened with lawsuits. Bo was sent away for a rest cure, while the crisis was managed behind closed doors. She returned to the public eye with a smile, but the cost was a deepening isolation and mistrust of those around her. The layers of deception and coercion used to protect Paramount's investment highlight the cruel reality faced by women in Bo's position. Every secret had a price, and every attempt to speak out was quickly silenced by those holding the purse strings. Bo's legacy is both a celebration of freedom and a sobering warning about what that freedom costs. Gloria Swanson. Gloria Swanson's rise from silent film star to enduring icon was marked by relentless ambition and an uncompromising sense of self. But the realities of early Hollywood demanded sacrifices that even Swanson could not escape. According to her autobiography and several biographies, Swanson became pregnant during a relationship that, if exposed, would have ended her career. The solution was arranged through the usual back channels. Studio lawyers and PR men coordinated a secret abortion, with cash payments ensuring absolute silence from all involved. Swanson later wrote candidly about the emotional toll such decisions took, describing a Hollywood where love, career, and bodily autonomy were all subject to negotiation, and where money could erase almost any consequence. The staff who assisted her were compensated not only for their services, but for their discretion, and any loose ends were handled swiftly and ruthlessly. Swanson's experience reveals the transactional nature of old Hollywood, where ambition was both rewarded and punished, and where the price of success was often paid in heartbreak hidden from public view. Her story is a testament to resilience, but also to a system that prioritized profits over the lives it shaped. Constance Bennett. Constance Bennett's name was synonymous with style, wit, and sophistication, qualities that made her one of the most bankable stars of the 1930s. But Bennett's glamorous reputation masked a complicated private life, one frequently upended by studio interference. Biographies detail how Bennett, during a particularly turbulent period, became pregnant, a development that threatened to derail both her career and her carefully managed image. The solution followed a now familiar pattern. Studio fixers arranged a discreet abortion, and Bennett's absence from the public eye was explained with a fabricated illness or international travel. Doctors and nurses received generous payouts, while those in Bennett's social circle were pressured to maintain silence through non-disclosure agreements and the promise of financial support. Even family members played their part, contributing to a wall of silence that kept the story out of the tabloids. The emotional fallout for Bennett was lasting. But as with so many of her peers, her pain was considered irrelevant by those in power. The goal was simple: preserve the star, protect the studio, and erase any evidence that didn't fit the narrative. Bennett's story closes the chapter on a Hollywood era built on secrets, where every illusion was paid for, and every truth could be buried with the right bribe. The golden age of Hollywood dazzled with its glamour, but behind every spotlight were secrets buried by power, bribes, and whispered threats. The women whose stories we've shared weren't just stars. They were survivors of an industry that demanded silence at any cost. Their pain remained hidden behind perfect smiles and red carpets, but the truth lingered in the shadows. As we remember their brilliance, let's not forget the price they paid to keep the Hollywood dream alive.